Previously, we covered the events of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February, March and April. The supposed second strongest army in the world was expected to steamroll through Ukraine, capture Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa and other major Ukrainian cities within weeks, if not days. Fast forward to early May, Russia had lost the Battle of Kyiv and abandoned its attempt to capture the capital, while its offensive on all fronts but the Donbass axis has stalled. Kherson in the south of Ukraine is the only major city Russia had been able to take under its full control before May. Both sides have suffered significant casualties, but Ukraine does not intend to stop its resistance and roll over. While the Russian government understands that giving up on their so-called special military operation without achieving almost anything could be a deadly blow it might fail to recover from. In this third video on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're going to describe the military operations and events which took place in May 2022. As we learn about current day struggles, you might feel like making the world a better place. We've got an easy way to do that with our sponsor, Donetica. It's a new search engine that seeks to benefit humanity by revenue sharing with a variety of non-profit organizations all over the world, focusing on health, welfare, charity and ecology. Like other search engines, they have sponsored results, ads, but the difference is 30% of the ad revenue goes to these good causes. And of course you still get the same search functionality you would somewhere else, so it's no loss to you. Their team carefully picks organizations to support, like Greenpeace, Variety, Doctors Without Borders and UNICEF. And all donations will be publicly displayed on their website, so you can see the actual amounts involved with nothing to hide. Make it easy by using their search extension, or make Donetica your default search engine and get started turning your usual internet activity into a force for good around the world. Check it all out using our link in the description to support our channel and dedicate your internet searches to a noble cause today. On the first day of May, the sources reported the start of the process of transition to the Russian ruble in occupied Melitopol, Volnovakha and Kherson. Along with mentions of a referendum in Kherson Oblast, this became yet another indicator that Russia is planning a transition to administer some of the territories it has already captured as part of Russia or as another puppet state. On May 2nd, Russia hit a strategically important bridge across the Dniester estuary, which is the only road and rail link between a large section of the Odessa region and the rest of Ukraine. Such missile strikes aimed to destroy the transportation infrastructure of Ukraine and create logistical difficulties for the Ukrainian army. On the same day, Ukraine sank 2 Russian Raptor patrol boats near Zmyny Island, as Ukraine continued its attempts to regain control over this small island with an aim to deblockade the Ukrainian-controlled parts of the Black Sea shore, which is crucial for Ukrainian exports, including grain. Also on May 2nd, reports of another Ukrainian counter-offensive in the Kharkiv Oblast emerged. Earlier in April, the Ukrainian forces managed to push back the Russian units further away from the city of Kharkiv. Throughout the first few days of May, Ukraine liberated several unspecified towns along the T-2014 highway between Kharkiv and Stary Soltiv, where the 92nd Mechanized Brigade and the 127th Infantry Brigade pushed back the Russian 61st Separate Naval Infantry Brigade. Ukraine also regained Syrkany thanks to the efforts of the 113th Territorial Defense Brigade and most of Cherkasky Tushki by the 3rd Special Purpose Regiment, in both of the latter cases defeating the 437th Motorized Rifle Regiment. The Ukrainian counter-offensive in this area aimed to force the Russian command to commit more forces to the Kharkiv Oblast and relieve some of the pressure on the Donbass front, and particularly on the Izium axis, as that counter-offensive put the Russian logistics and transport hubs in Kupiansk and Vovchansk in danger. Ukraine also wanted to push the Russians away from within artillery strike distance of the city of Kharkiv. Meanwhile, the Battle of Mariupol continued, and on May 4th, the Russian troops entered the Azovstal steel plant complex for the first time. A few hundred Ukrainian defenders were still there at the time, continuing their doomed but defiant resistance. We will talk about the Battle of Mariupol in more detail in the coming months, when more information becomes available. The Russian bombing campaign continued in early May, with the main purpose of this airstrike campaign being to slow down the arms delivery to the Ukrainian army fighting in the east and south of the country. it is difficult to ascertain if the campaign is successful. The Russian aircraft almost never enter air over land controlled by the Ukrainians, fearing anti-air guns, so almost every air and missile strike is made from extreme distances, and the Russian lack of precision missiles is well known. On May 4th, Russia intensified its attacks in the east, but failed to make any notable gains, apart from the 15th Separate Guards Rifle Motor Brigade, pushing the 79th Air Assault Brigade south of Yampil towards Ozerno. Elsewhere, the 81st Air Assault Brigade defeated yet another attempt on Braskivka by the 27th Separate Guards Rifle Motor Brigade. The 57th Motorized Brigade prevented the 30th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade from making a breakthrough in Yaremivka, while the 95th Air Assault Brigade maintained its positions in Liman against the offensive of the 74th Separate Guards Rifle Motor Brigade. On May 6th and 7th, Ukraine launched several airstrikes on the Russian military equipment on Zmyny Island, destroying the Cerner-class landing craft, 2 Tor surface-to-air missile systems, and a helicopter. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the Ukrainian attack on the island was defeated, in the process of which 4 aircraft, 10 helicopters, 29 drones, and 3 armored assault crafts were destroyed. These numbers are too high to believe their credibility, and the Russians failed to present any proof. However, it is clear that Russia maintained its control over the island. In the first week of May, Russia continued its attempts to break through around the Severodonetsk salient. On May 7th, Russia completed the capture of Popasna, with the infamous far-right Wagner mercenary group spearheading the effort. But the Ukrainian forces withstood Russian attacks in other directions. The same is true for the Zaporizhia front, where the artillery battles continued without any notable change on the battlefield. In the south, the Ukrainian command reported the liberation of 4 unspecified towns around Snehirivka, north of Kherson, as the 80th Air Assault Brigade continued putting pressure on the Russian forces in the region. The notable partisan activity in the south of Ukraine, particularly Kherson and Melitopol, continued. On May 5th, an explosion happened at the Melitopol airport. One of the most decisive battles so far in the war started on May 8th, as Russian forces started their attempt to cross the Seversky Donets River at Belohorivka using several pontoon bridges, aiming to surround the Lysychansk-Severodonetsk agglomeration from the south. We'll talk in a bit about what happened in the next few days in Belohorivka. Meanwhile, on May 9th, the day Russia celebrates victory over Nazi Germany in World War II, all eyes were on Moscow, which was hosting its annual military parade and celebrations. Some were expecting Putin to announce general mobilization or formally declare war on Ukraine, but none of this happened, as Putin merely repeated his usual rhetoric on the importance of the so-called special military operation to protect the people of Donbass. Between May 7th and 9th, Ukraine continued its advance in the Kharkiv Oblast, as the 92nd Mechanized Brigade and 127th Territorial Defense Brigade liberated Bayrak, Rybizhne, and Ternovo, reaching the border with Russia. But it was not all positive for the Ukrainian army, as it suffered setbacks by losing Velika Komishivaka in the Izium Axis to the 5th Separate Guards Tank Brigade, as well as Nizhny to the 127th Motor Rifle Division, which advanced on Toshkivka and pushed back the 111th Territorial Defense Unit on the Donbass front. But arguably the single biggest disaster faced by the Russian army on this front took place on May 10th in the aforementioned Belohorivka. The Ukrainian drones managed to spot the location of the pontoon bridge, which 1 or 2 BTGs of the Russian army were crossing at the time. The artillery of the Ukrainian 17th Tank Brigade fired a massive artillery barrage on the bridge and on tightly gathered Russian vehicles and personnel. The Ukrainian army claimed to destroy 30 Russian vehicles and disable another 40, which the recent images and videos confirmed, along with killing 485 soldiers. Military analysts assessed this event not only as the destruction of 1 or 2 BTGs, but as an entire brigade losing a significant portion of its firepower. On May 11th to 13th, Ukraine continued its counter-offensive in the Kharkiv Oblast, forcing Russia to redeploy 3 to 4 BTGs from the Izium Axis to Kupiansk and Vovchansk to protect against the Ukrainian eastward movement towards key logistical lines. By then, Russia managed to create a defensive line 10 kilometers from the border between Kazachalopan and Vesela. Also, despite a major setback in Bilohorivka, the Russian units made several gains around Izium and in Donbass. The 30th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade captured the villages of Oleksandrivka and Shandrigolove in the Izium axis. The 57th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade managed to cross the Seversky Donets River northwest of Privilya and took Voyevodivka, along with finally capturing Rubizhne after almost 2 months of intense fighting, putting further pressure on Severodonetsk from the north. As was the case with many other urban centers in the region, Ukrainian forces only retreated from Rubizhne after they were turned to ruins by the indiscriminate Russian artillery and rocket barrages. Still, this retreat upped the pressure on Severodonetsk, which the Russians could now attack from the northwest. The Russian 40th Naval Infantry Battalion continued its advance from the captured Popasna, advancing to Alexandropilya, but being repulsed in Katarinivka by the 24th Mechanized Brigade. Advancing westwards from Popasna aimed to secure the encirclement of the Severodonetsk salient. In the south of the Donbass front, the Ukrainian 56th Motorized Brigade and the Donbass Battalion repelled the Russian assault on the villages of Novobakhmativka and Novokalanove. The military situation in Zaporizhia and Kherson remained stable, but the deputy head of the Russia-appointed Kherson administration stated the intention of the Kherson Oblast to merge with Russia on May 11th. On May 13th, for the first time since the start of the war, Defense Secretary of the USA, Lloyd Austin, and the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, held telephone talks, where Austin urged Shoigu to ensure a ceasefire in Ukraine. In general, in the third week of May, both sides made gains on different fronts. Ukraine continued its advance in the Kharkiv Oblast. On May 16th, the Ukrainian army established a bridgehead over the Seversky Donets in Chepil, advancing towards Ruzhneva and Ivanivka, where they were stopped by the 38th and 64th Separate Motor Rifle Brigades. Another bridgehead was established over the Seversky Donets by the 92nd Mechanized Brigade at Stary Saltiv and advanced on Behaivka to the north and Kotimlya to the south on May 16th to 18th. But overall, bolstered by the LPR separatist units, the Russian army managed to stabilize the front in the Kharkiv Oblast, as the LPR militia and the 27th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade recaptured Rubizhne, Ternova and Staritsya on May 18th to 19th. Russia made its most important gains in the third week of May in the Izium and Donbass axis. The 752nd Motor Rifle Regiment and the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division managed to defeat the Ukrainian resistance at the Oskil pocket, forcing remaining defenders to withdraw towards Yaremivka. The Russian 90th Guards Tank Division captured Shandrigolove, Novoselivka and Drobisheva north of Liman, and engaged the 95th and 79th Air Assault Brigades for Dibrova and Ozerna. Russia also continued its breakthrough north of Popasna, after the Ukrainian defences of the 17th Tank Brigade were penetrated in Hirska by the 57th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade and the 4th Motor Rifle Brigade. The 127th Motor Rifle Division advanced from Toshkivka to the P-66 highway. West of Popasna, the Russian naval infantry units and Wagner mercenaries continued their advance as the Donbass Battalion and the 24th Mechanized Brigade was forced to retreat to Volodymyrivka and Soledar. Battles in Vrobivka and Veselivka ensued. The fall of these towns could result in Russia taking control of parts of the T-1302 highway, which is a key supply line for the Ukrainian units in the Severodonetsk salient. These gains by the Russian army made one of the main goals of their campaign in Donbass very possible: encirclement of the Severodonetsk salient and the Ukrainian units fighting there, along with completing the capture of Luhansk Oblast. On these days, Russia also finally broke through the line of contact in Donbass, as elements of the 1st and 2nd Army Corps managed to capture several towns between Avdiivka and New York, pushing the Ukrainian 56th Motorized Brigade back in the process. There had also been a small advance of the 3rd Motor Rifle Brigade north of Holivka between Toretsk and Zaitsevo, along with the capture of a small territory between Velika Novosilka and Marinka by the 155th Naval Infantry Unit in the Zaporizhian front. The situation in the Kherson Oblast remained largely stable. Several reports claiming that the Russian units in Kherson Oblast were digging trenches and preparing defensive structures indicated that Russia did not have any immediate plans to attack on this front and was bracing for defensive operations there. The third week of May should also be remembered for the complete capture of Mariupol by Russian forces, as after almost 3 months of fighting, the remaining several hundred Ukrainian defenders in the Azovstal complex surrendered to Russia on May 16th and 17th. On the diplomatic front, the most notable news was Sweden and Finland making their intention of joining NATO official on May 18th, which was followed by threats from Russian officials against them. In the final week of May, heavy battles continued in the Kharkiv, Izium, Donbass and Kherson axes. North and northeast of Kharkiv, Russia managed to defend its line roughly 10 kilometers away from the border, but it was reported that Ukraine regained Tarnova once again after losing it to the Russian forces. West of Izium, Ukraine liberated Velika Komyshevaha and Rudnova to put pressure on Russian forces around Izium and the MO3 highway, an important supply route for the Russian war effort in Donbass. South of Izium, the Russian 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division put pressure on the 81st Air Assault Brigade towards Pasika, likely to gain control of a favorable crossing over the Seversky Donets, while continuing to attack Devhenka. On May 26th, Russia captured Liman through the efforts of the 90th Guards Tank Division, pushing the Ukrainian 3rd Tank Brigade, 57th Motorized Brigade, 79th Air Assault Brigade, the 128th Mountain Brigade, and the 15th Slavic National Guard Regiment to their secondary defensive positions south of the Seversky Donets River near Ryhorodok and Svyatihori National Park. If Russia managed to continue their advance in this direction, they would reach the city of Slavyansk. But the most important Russian advance took place in the Severodonetsk salient. Russia had been putting immense pressure on this direction since April. It is surprising that instead of trying to complete the surround by taking both roads running from the agglomeration to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, the Russians tried to storm Severodonetsk, leading to casualties. Regardless, on May 31st, the governor of Luhansk Oblast, Serhiy Haidai, conceded that 70 to 80% of the city fell under Russian control, as the Wagner mercenaries, the Chechen Guard units, and elements of the 2nd Army Corps pushed back the 111th and 115th Territorial Defense Brigades, along with units of the Ukrainian National Guard. The Ukrainian command implied that it was a planned withdrawal, since Lysychansk, the logical next target of the Russian army in this direction, is beyond the Seversky Donets River and on higher ground, making its defense easier. Russia also continued its advance around captured Popasna. North of Popasna, heavy battles were reported in Hirska, Zalota, Toshkivka, and Komyshevaha, and it looks like these towns have changed hands several times. The main units engaged in battles in this direction were the 17th Tank Brigade on the Ukrainian side, and the 127th Motor Rifle Division, 57th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, and the 336th Separate Naval Infantry Brigade on the Russian side. South of Popasna, the Wagner Group advanced from Troitska along the Luhan River against the exposed left flank of the Ukrainian 30th Mechanized Brigade, taking Vozdvizhenka and Mironivsky. Their advance was supported by the 40th Separate Naval Infantry Brigade and the 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade. There was also a westwards advance towards Solidar by the 76th Guards Air Assault Division, 106th Guards Airborne Division, and 35th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, aiming to reach the T-1302 highway, which brought supplies to the Ukrainian defenders in Lysychansk. The 118th Territorial Defense Brigade, the 80th Air Assault Brigade, 14th and 25th Mechanized Brigades, and Donbass Battalion managed to halt the Russian advance in this direction. In the south of the Donbass front, the main development was the Russian attempt to encircle the Ukrainian units in Avdiivka, namely the 56th Motorized Brigade, cutting it from the 54th Mechanized Brigade in the south and the important supply line of the H-20 highway in the north. The 100th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, the 1st Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, and the 5th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, and the 61st Separate Naval Infantry Brigade were attempting to complete this operation at the time of the preparation of this video. While the Zaporizhian front remained relatively stable, finally there was some significant movement in the Kherson front. Reports of redeployment of some of the Russian units from the Kherson Oblast to Donbass weakened Russian defenses in this area, and Ukraine managed localized success north of Kherson towards Snehirivka, engaging the 34th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade in this town, and Davdiv Brid, where a bridgehead was established over the Inhalets River. The Ukrainian army liberated towns and villages of Bila Krenitsia, Bilohirka, Lozova, and Andrivka, advancing 10 kilometers towards Bruskinska, where their advance was halted by the 205th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade. Elements of the 14th, 60th, and 63rd Mechanized Infantry Brigades, and the 80th Air Assault Brigade, and the 108th Territorial Defense Brigade took part in this counter-offensive. It is unclear if the Ukrainians are planning their counter-offensive here or to the east of Kharkiv, but their ability to gain footholds across the rivers Inhalets and Donets might be a sign of things to come. May did not bring the end of the war in Ukraine. The third month of the war brought more misery, death, and destruction without an end in sight. Officials and military commanders from both sides are already talking about operations in the summer of 2022, which indicates that the war will likely go on for at least several more months. Russia looks to achieve something meaningful, like capturing the whole of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, which they would try to sell to the local public as a victory. Russia and the officials appointed by it to the occupied territories talk about referendums and simplifying the procedure of obtaining Russian passports by Ukrainian citizens living in these occupied territories. But significant partisan activity persists in these areas, making sustainable control of these territories by Russia extremely difficult. For instance, the Russian-appointed mayor of Enerhodar was injured in a blast, which was undoubtedly the work of the clandestine Ukrainian resistance groups. Explosions in Melitopol have reportedly forced the Russian-appointed mayor of the city to ask for resignation too. Reports of the destruction of numerous military enlistment centers in Russia, along with the increased criticism of the war effort by many Russian military bloggers, mostly belonging to the nationalist wing, indicate that the Russian public is not as supportive of the war in Ukraine as it may have been in the beginning of the war. While in late May Russia managed to gain some ground in Donbass, it continued suffering massive casualties, prompting them to deploy old T-62 tanks, the production of which was halted in 1975, along with increasing the maximum age of voluntary enlistment to 50. Reports of low morale in the Russian army, and especially in the separatist armies, which enlisted many people without any military training whatsoever, continue to emerge. This is the list of Russian losses visually confirmed by the Oryx military blog by June 1st. 749 tanks, 1,073 military vehicles, 79 command posts and communication stations, 281 artillery pieces and systems, 86 anti-aircraft systems, 30 military aircraft, 43 helicopters, and 77 drones. The most recent estimate of Russian manpower losses, claimed by an unnamed Western official, was somewhere around 20,000 killed and 40,000 wounded on June 1st. Such losses do not inspire particular confidence in the ability of the Russian army to develop its moderate success in Donbass in late May. The unconfirmed report of the substitution of Dvornikov for Zhidko as the Russian overall commander of the war in Ukraine indicates that Putin remains unhappy with the progress of military operations in Ukraine. The EU-wide ban on the import of all Russian oil not supplied by pipelines, which intends to block 90% of the Russian oil exports to Europe, is going to cause billions of losses to the already damaged Russian economy. Ukraine does not intend to back down either, as it looks to engage in more counter-offensive operations to liberate its lands, and urges the West for more weapon support. This support is uneven, with some countries like the US and the UK leading the effort, while the likes of Germany and France are more reserved. The US, for instance, is planning to deliver M142 high-mobility artillery rocket systems, colloquially known as HIMARS, to Ukraine, which will give the defending country an opportunity to outshoot the Russians with HIMARS' 80-kilometer range. The Ukrainians lacked this capability in the previous month, and this new acquisition might create danger for the Russian logistical hubs in Popasna, Izium, Vovchansk, and possibly Kupiansk, possibly fueling the Ukrainian counter-offensives or halting the Russian advance. Recent successes in the Kharkiv Oblast, where Ukraine advanced for 40 to 50 kilometers and pushed Russia back to the border in some places and to 10 kilometers of the border in others, and Kherson Oblast, where the Ukrainian military advanced for around 10 kilometers but is still within 55 kilometers of one of the recent Ukrainian advance points of Snehurivka, will certainly give hope to the Ukrainians. But their setback in Donbass was yet another indicator that, despite all of its failures, Russia still possesses significant firepower. In May, Russia had advanced for around 50 to 60 kilometers in some directions on the Izium axis, 20 to 25 kilometers north of Popasna, and around 50 kilometers south of Popasna. Ukraine is also suffering significant losses, which was confessed by the Ukrainian President Zelensky, who stated that Ukraine is losing 60 to 100 soldiers every day. According to the Oryx blog, Ukraine has confirmed losses of 187 tanks, 382 military vehicles, 2 command posts and communication stations, 99 artillery pieces and systems, 49 anti-aircraft systems, 25 military aircraft, 11 helicopters, and 19 drones. Thanks again to our sponsor Genetica, the search engine that donates 30% of the revenue your searches generate to good causes all around the world. Give it a go and learn more using our link in the description. Unfortunately, we'll continue talking about the conflict in Ukraine in the coming months, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.